Imagine floating 240,000 miles from home, pressed against a window barely bigger than a dinner plate, watching your entire planet rise over a dead gray horizon. Small, blue, and completely alone in the black. No sound, no air outside that glass, no sense of up or down anymore because up and down don't really mean anything out there. Just Earth, hanging in the dark, like it's the only thing in the universe that was ever actually finished. That's not a metaphor. It really happened, caught on film decades ago, and it wrecked the three men who saw it in a way nobody could fully explain for almost 20 years afterward. Except it wasn't really about the view at all. On December 24th, 1968, Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders was supposed to be photographing crater walls on the moon's far side. He and his crewmates, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, had just become the first humans to leave Earth's orbit entirely and the first to see the moon's hidden face with their own eyes. A first in human history, on its own, for anyone alive to witness. That same night, on a live broadcast, beamed back to a planet watching in silence. The three of them took turns reading from the opening lines of Genesis before wishing everyone back home a good night. None of that turned out to be the moment that actually stuck. As the spacecraft rolled to reposition, Earth came up over the lunar horizon on its own, uninvited, mid-maneuver. Anders grabbed a Hasselblad camera and fired off 3 frames before anyone had time to think about what they were actually looking at. Years later, in an oral history for NASA, he said it was the single most striking thing he saw on the whole mission, brighter and more vivid than he expected, floating over lunar ground that hadn't visibly changed in a billion years. The photo, now known as Earthrise, went on to anchor Time's list of the century's greatest images, and Life's ranking of the 100 photos that changed the world. Historians still credit it as one of the sparks behind the modern environmental movement. For the first time in human history, an entire planet looked small enough to feel fragile. But here's the thing. The astronauts themselves described something stranger than a nice photo. Apollo 14's Edgar Mitchell flew to the moon in 1971, the 6th human being to ever walk on it. On the trip home, with nothing left to do but stare out at Earth hanging in the window for hour after hour, something in him just shifted. He came back describing a sudden, overwhelming sense that everyone down there, every person, every border, every argument that had felt so urgent a week earlier, was connected in a way he'd only ever understood intellectually before, never actually felt in his body. It hit him hard enough that in 1973, he founded an entire research institute just to study what had happened inside his own head on the way home. That's not a man who saw a nice view. That's a man whose worldview got rearranged mid-flight, and he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out why. Here's the part nobody talks about. For almost 2 decades, none of this had a name. Astronaut after astronaut came home describing some version of the same jolt, in their own words, with no idea anyone else had felt it too, let alone that it was common enough to have a pattern. Then in 1987, a Harvard-educated space philosopher named Frank White finally gave it one, the overview effect. After talking to more than 50 astronauts and realizing they kept circling the exact same experience using completely different language from completely different backgrounds, countries, and space programs, White went on to co-found the Overview Institute in 2008, specifically to study why looking down at your own planet does this to a human brain and what it might mean for how we treat that planet once we're back on it. Turns out it wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't just poetic license. It was a pattern, hiding in plain sight for 20 years, waiting for someone to actually write it down. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 2016, psychologist David Yadin and his team at the University of Pennsylvania finally put this under an actual scientific lens, the first serious academic study of the overview effect. They gathered dozens of astronaut accounts from multiple countries and combed through them line by line, and the same threads kept showing up regardless of nationality, era, or background. Unity, vastness, a jolt of emotion nobody said they were fully prepared for, no matter how many simulations they'd trained on beforehand. Yadin's team classified it as a self-transcendent experience, the same broad category as deep meditation, a psychedelic trip, or a near-death experience. Which means this isn't just poetry dressed up as science. It's a specific, recognizable state your brain is apparently capable of entering, given the right conditions. And it's not just an academic curiosity. Researchers now openly wonder what it means for the crews who will spend years, not weeks, looking back at a shrinking Earth on the way to Mars. And that raised an obvious next question. If it's really just about the view, you should be able to fake it. So in 2024, researchers Femke van Horen and Marijn Myers ran the experiment for real, strapping people into VR headsets and showing them the same Earth from space footage astronauts describe. A 7-minute version changed nothing measurable about how people acted afterward, not even small things like donating to an environmental cause. A longer 15-minute version showed a slightly stronger effect, but even the researchers stopped short of calling it anything close to what astronauts report after actual spaceflight. Which raises a question that doesn't have a clean answer yet. If the image alone were the whole story, virtual reality should have nailed this by now, on a laptop, for free. No rocket required. It didn't. Not even close. So here's the full picture. It was probably never just the view, it's the whole package. The risk, the isolation, the fact that you actually left instead of just watching from a headset in your living room with the lights still on. You're somewhere it's genuinely possible you don't make it back from, staring at the one place that's ever kept a human being alive, with nothing to do but sit with that fact for days at a time. That combination, real stakes plus real distance plus real time to sit with it, is something a screen still hasn't figured out how to fake, no matter how sharp the resolution gets or how good the headset is. You'll probably never float 240,000 miles from home and watch Earth rise over a dead horizon. Most of us won't, but you don't actually need to. Every one of us gets smaller versions of the same jolt on a much smaller budget. A wide open sky on a clear night, a mountain ridge at sunset, a horizon at 3 a.m. when the world finally goes quiet enough to hear yourself think again. Even Yaden's own research since 2016 has pointed the same direction. The everyday version of awe, the kind you can get from a good sunset or a big enough view, taps into some of the same machinery, just turned down low. You don't need a spacecraft for that. You just need to stop long enough to notice you're standing on the same small, blue, finished-looking thing every single person you've ever met is also standing on. The overview effect was never really about space. It's about how rarely we let ourselves feel small enough to remember that. Look up more often.